Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Aman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going to go through the best cheapies to consider for the 2022 SuperCoach season. I'm recording this a day before Team List Tuesday, so we have got slight nuggets of information coming through, but we'll get final confirmation on Tuesday. But I thought it'd be good to get this video out in any case. Hopefully not too much information changes after I've recorded, but we will go through a Q&A later in the week as well, where you should get a full wrap up of all the best cheapies. But if you do enjoy the video, really appreciate a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get straight into it. So going to be going through this position by position. So starting off at the hooker, there's a few options, not too many that we can consider. I think the most obvious one is going to be Chris Randall. It sounds like he's going to be playing maybe 60 to 70 minutes potentially at that starting number 9 spot. We have seen in the past he has a very good work rate, makes a lot of tackles. Last season averaged about 35 and 39 minutes. So if he gets to about 60 to 70 minutes playing at number 9, we could maybe see at least 45 to 50 points, maybe even up to the 60 mark. So I think at 245k, Chris Randall should be a pretty obvious selection at hooker. Now, I have seen quite a few people go with the double cheap hooker route because there's a couple in the likes of Corey Pay and Billy Walters. Now, Corey Pay, I think my stocks in him very wavering. It's definitely going to be a TLT dependent decision. If it looks like there's going to be a situation with Turpin on the bench, which to be honest, I think is probably going to be the situation. I don't think Pay is going to get the full 80 minutes. Then in my opinion, I don't think I'm going to be going for Corey Pay, just because having a cheap hooker combination of Chris Randall and Pay, for me, for squad structure, it just means how easily can you move off if one of them starts to flop into one of your gun hookers. So for me, I'm personally just going to run with the one cheapie, obviously depending on if Corey Pay becomes a standout option based on TLT. So I'm going to go with Chris Randall, it's probably the best pick, and then Corey Pay probably is in second, but really is dependent on TLT. Similar to Billy Walters, has got the halfback and hooker flexibility. Maybe gets the starting 5'8" gig, but I'm just a little bit concerned with the rotation there. Maybe Albert Kelly can come into the frame, maybe a Tyson Gamble. There's a few options that could come in for the Broncos. So Walters, I'm a little bit iffy on just because of the job security. Now, looking at the Titans, we've got Aaron Clark and Will Smith. Now, I expect Aaron Clark to be the starting hooker, but again, it could be a situation where his minutes might increase from around 44 up to maybe say 55, 60. But I just don't know how much additional upside there's going to be when you can pay 50k less for Chris Randall and maybe can punch out similar output, if not better. Will Smith, you'd expect playing off the bench in the number 14 utility role, could eat into Clark's minutes. So I'm not too keen on running with either of those two. I think Chris Randall is the standout. And if I had to go for any others, maybe Pay and Billy Walters, but even then I'm not that confident in them. So really, I would just go with the one, and it probably would be Chris Randall as my cheapie to go for in the hooker slot. So next up in the front row forward, now a lot of the players I will mention is quite speculative. Now, I don't necessarily think every cheapie that I've gotten written here is the best one, but there are a few that we can consider, and there's no ranking as well. I should have mentioned in the previous section that these players are not ranked in from best to worst. But we've got the likes of Ethan Bullimore. I think quite a lot of discussion around him in the preseason. Put a little asterisk next to his name because you can get him in the second row forward. The second row forward does not have that many cheapies, so you could maybe consider going with him at second row forward instead of front row forward. It looks like he's going to get potentially the starting gig at the left edge with the absence of Schuster, and especially with the likes of Olakuatu also missing for what we think for the first few rounds of the season. I'm still a little bit torn on Bullimore, whether he's like a trap or not. I know a few people do think that he is a trap. It could just be a case that, look, at 280k, even if he's not the best cash cow or cheapie, he could still provide some okay depth coming off the bench, because even last season at the Broncos, 25 minutes he was averaging 30 points. Look, that's okay. Even if the minutes increase from like maybe 5 to 10 extra, maybe the average goes up to about 35, that could just be decent coverage in your team, knowing that we need good squad depth just because of all the injuries and COVID issues we might get this year. So Bullimore, I'm definitely thinking I'll just start with him, I think, but again, depends on the makeup of TLT. Max King, I'm really hoping he gets a bench spot for the Bulldogs, because I think we really do want cheap front row forward options. 188k is also a very nice price. So Max King, I'm hoping he gets a bench spot for the Bulldogs, and if he does, I think he definitely will be one of my kind of bench front row forwards and hopefully a good cash cow. Now Fafita, Andrew Fafita from the Sharks, obviously had a lot of injury issues recently, but has looked really good in the trials, and I'm just hoping he also can get into the starting 17 for the Sharks. They have had some issues with forwards, the likes of Wade Graham going down. Maybe the door's open for Fafita to get into the starting 17, and if he does, I do think that he could be an option. I mean, 205k, it's a very low kind of risk, I think, paying that much amount of money for him, and so Fafita I do like as a front row forward cheapie if named in the 17. So I think Bullimore, King and Fafita are probably the three that I'd maybe consider. But realistically, because we can get Bullimore in the second row forward, I think it's King and Fafita, who are the two front row forward cheapies I'd go for. Now, there's a few other options that we could consider. Maybe Momoasia from the Knights, if he gets into the 17, has also got dual flexibility, but it seems like that might not be the case. The Knights do have pretty good forward depth, so I'm not sure if Momoasia is going to get a run. If he does, though, I might consider him over a Fafita, just because he's got that dual flexibility. So maybe I'd go with him, but not too keen, I think. And Spencer Leniu. Now, a few people have asked about Spencer Leniu. Now, anyone who had played last season would remember that Leniu was a decent cheapie. He was about 188k priced, but he didn't make that much money actually, now I think about it. And I'm just not sure if I'd run with him again, just because, look, the output was fine, 29 points and an average of 24 minutes, but I'm not sure how much extra minutes he's going to get. And the fact that he's also increased in price to 258k, I'm just not sure how much value is going to be there in terms of a cash cow potential. So Spencer Leniu, I'm probably not too keen on. Now, Jermaine Tanua-Brown is a player that I've seen a lot of people go for in their starting front row forward, not necessarily even on their bench. Now, the reason is he's come over from the Warriors. He punched out about 45 points in around the same amount of time, minutes-wise, in the trials. So, if he gets a starting gig at front row forward, I think you'll see that he will become a quite popular cheapie in the front row forward. I think especially because we think that front row forward is a position that doesn't have that much upside. You might want to take some money out of front row forward. I don't mind then going with Tanua-Brown, even as a starting front row forward, but I think the more safer option, if say for example, Fafita is not an option to us or King's not an option to us, I'd definitely then think about maybe just putting Tanua-Brown on my bench, but I definitely think he can be someone we can consider. You've got the likes of Aaron Penne, Tapai Maroa and George Burgess. Now, the reason George Burgess is in italics there is because his stats are from around 2019 when he was last in the league. Now, the fact that he's coming off injuries, coming back into the Dragons, I'm not sure how much upside or growth is going to be there in terms of points and cash. So I'm not considering George Burgess that much myself. Tapai Maroa, it looked like he could have been an option for us, but it seems less and less likely that he's going to be in the 17 for the Storm. So I think that kind of rules him out as an option. And Aaron Penne is probably likely, if he is going to get a spot, is going to be on the bench in the prop rotation. Now, the PPM is fine at 1, 33 average in 33 minutes when he was playing for the Storm, I think it was last season. But again, 287k, I think you can just save the money, go with a Tanua-Brown, go with a King, Fafita and Bullimore. Those are probably the options that I would really consider, I think, when looking at my cheapie front row forward. Now, taking a look at the second row forward, now we're going to see a little bit later in the centre wing area that there's quite a few cheapies there. And so I think for that reason, Isaac Targo, who you can pick in centre wing, I would actually advise getting him at second row forward. It looks like he's nailed the left edge, the left centre spot for the Panthers. And I think because there's quite a lack of cheapies in second row forward, I would advise going for Targo in the second row forward section. I think he's got pretty decent average of 33 and 37 minutes, playing on the end of a good backline in the Panthers. I think he's a pretty easy choice. Obviously, TLT might throw something crazy and he might not play there, but it looks like that's going to be the case. We look like we might have another cheapie as well in Kelma Tuolagi from the Tigers at 255k. It's not a bad price to be paying for a starting back rower. That's the kind of tidbit of information we've got. It seems like he's going to be starting. A bit of mystery around Luke Garner, whether he's even going to be in the 17 on the bench or if he's going to start. We just really don't know yet. And so if, say, for example, Garner was on the bench, it still throws a bit of a 50-50. Is it a case of Garner is slowly going to come back into the starting lineup? Maybe he's just recovering from injuries. Or is it simply a case that Tuolagi has displaced him because of the good performances in the trials? In either situation, I still think that Tuolagi is fine to get at 255k, starting back rower, pretty decent PPM in the small sample size that we have from last season. And so I'd be pretty comfortable picking Tuolagi. And if he's starting, I think we should just don't overthink it and just pick him up. Now, some others that we can maybe consider, Brendan Piakura from the Broncos. He had a very small sample size last year, only played the 11 minutes for an average of 2 because he did get sin binned. Now, the question is whether he's going to break into the starting pack. I'm just not sure about that because they've got Capewell and Ricky, who I see like Capewell I don't see being dropped. Ricky potentially can maybe get rotated. If he gets named on the bench come round 2, then Piakura could be an option. I think if, say for example, you're looking at a Targo, a Kelma Tuolagi, and then in your third spot, say if you were considering just nuffing out and going for like a bench of Vojovic, I would actually then recommend instead going for Piakura, just in the hope that he does get a chance later in the season. And so I would probably do that instead of going with an outright nuff into Vojovic, get Piakura and hope that he can maybe jag somewhere in the 17 in the future. We know that Kevy likes to rotate a little bit, so that might open the door for Piakura in the future. So those top 3 are probably going to be the ones that I'd recommend. If, say, you want to go for a little bit more certainty and a little bit more depth in your second row forward spot, you could maybe go for like a Bullimore. We just discussed Bullimore in the front row forward forward section, you could maybe slot in Bullimore instead. We also seem like we're going to get a news that Josh King from the Storm could be starting in round 1. My only concern there is that come round 2 when Harry Grant is back, is Brandon Smith you'd expect will go back to the lock spot, and then Josh King might go back to the bench. And then I think at 255k, he's kind of priced at what you might expect from him. Similar output, say 25 minutes, he would average 28. I just don't see much room for growth there. And so I've also mentioned Andrew Davey. That's also if it's a bit of a bolter if he gets that left edge spot for the Sea Eagles, although I'm thinking that Bullimore is going to get that spot. It's either Bullimore or Lawton, in my opinion. Now, Davey is also coming back off a pretty serious injury, so I'm not really considering him too much as a cheapie. Other guys like Momo Asia and Tupai Moroa, I've already given my thoughts on in the front row forward section. And then Jack Howarth, it looks like he's actually more likely to play in the centres for the Storm at some point during the season, maybe around Origin time though, when a few of their gun players do leave for Origin. But I'm not suspecting for him to be a great cheapie in all honesty. And so personally, I would probably lean with going like a Targo, a Piakura, Kelma Tulagi, and then maybe a Bullimore in your second row forward. I think those are probably the best cheapies that I can consider or recommend. Now I'm just going to combine the halfback and the 5'8 cheapies. I don't think this section really needs to be discussed too heavily. It seems like Lachlan Ilias is locked in for the halfback spot for the Rabbitohs. I was about to say the Raiders, sorry. But at 205k with a starting gig for the Rabbitohs, I think it's a no-brainer in my opinion. He is dual listed as well. You can get him at 5'8 and halfback. I would advise picking him at 5'8, and that's mainly due to the fourth player on this list, Brad Schneider. It looks like Schneider at 188k is going to get the starting gig for the Raiders, and I think when you've got a starting halfback at 188k, just kind of take the gift. And I've even read reports that if Croker is potentially not going to be in the 17, that means that Schneider may even goal kick. A goal-kicking halfback at 188k I think is a great gift that we can all jump on, and therefore I think it's very easy for me to recommend Ilias at 5'8 and then Schneider in the bench spot for halfback. A few others that you can consider, like a Blake Taaffe, I wouldn't really advise, to be honest, just because it seems like he'll play fullback for the first round, but then as soon as Latrell Mitchell is back, I expect Taaffe to go to the number 14 utility spot, so therefore that kind of kills his appeal as a cheapie. Ezra Mam was someone we could consider, if he gets a gig at 5'8", but I'm not expecting that to be the case at the start of the season. Definitely someone on the watch list, though, I think for later as a nice downgrade option. You've got the likes of Adam Clune, Corey Payne, Billy Walters I've already spoken about. Like Clune could be okay. He looked pretty decent in the trials, but I just think at 294k, I would just take the 90k saving and go for Ilias, or even like 100k and go for Schneider. And I think those downgrades can let you go for a more gun option at halfback, like a Cleary, Sam Walker, Moses, Nico Hines. Then finally, Amon. I was very hot on Amon, but you can pick him up in centre wing. He is 5'8 and centre wing listed. And I think the emergence of Schneider and Ilias, if they do get named in round 1, just means I'd probably advise to put Amon in your centre wing. And so I think overall it's pretty obvious for me to recommend Ilias and Schneider as the two best kind of cheapies to go for in the halfback and the 5'8. And maybe you can consider Amon, maybe you can consider Ezra Mam, but I think those are guys that, Amon, I'd probably say put him in the centre wing instead, and Mam more for the watch list. Now the centre wing, this is where we've got quite a few cheapies that we can consider. Now I probably should mention at the start of the video as well, but my criteria for cheapies was players who are under 300k. I did break the rule here though, adding in Kevin Nguama at 307k. Main reason is that it's been confirmed that Suwali is not going to play round 1. I think Suwali is going to be the first choice right winger for the Roosters if he's fit and ready to go. My thing is that he's a young kid still. What is he, 19 years old? The Roosters are normally pretty cautious with their players. They're going to want to protect him, I think, as much as they can. And so I don't think they're going to throw him back in unless he's 100%. And so I would advise starting with Nguama, just because the right wing for the Roosters is going to be so profitable. For the wingers, we know that Brett Morris has done so well in the past couple of seasons. Matt Ikuvalu as well has had really hot try-scoring streaks. And I think 307k on the end of a really dangerous Roosters backline, I think Nguama is fine to pick there. And so what I would do then is just carry Nguama, and then whenever Suwali is back into the frame, just downgrade to Suwali, because you just never know with Suwali. You might keep him in your centre wing, and then the Roosters might say, oh, we're just going to give him a few extra weeks just to make sure that he's 100%, and then you kind of maybe kicking yourself that you didn't start with Nguama, and they might have been leaving a lot of points on the table. So I would recommend Nguama. Penasini looks like he's locked in for a starting centre role at the Eels. I think the Eels are in for a great season. I think they're going to make a good push for the finals and for the premiership. So Penasini is a pretty obvious choice in my eyes. He's got pretty good base, averaging 42 last season in the small sample size, so pretty obvious choice there. I do like Pereira as well. Pereira's got pretty decent base. Looks like he might get the right wing spot for the Broncos, but this one is more of a decision I need to just wait on for TLT, just to see if he's actually going to get a wing spot. If he does get a starting wing spot though, I'm pretty confident in picking him. 266k is a pretty decent price. Another one I thought is a bit more of a banker is Sean Russell. So obviously Hayes Dunster had a pretty serious knee injury in the preseason trials. Now if Sean Russell, as expected, is going to get the left wing spot because Mike Acevo is also out, I really like Sean Russell at 285k, just on the end of the left edge for the Eels. That definitely seems like the side that they like to attack the most. So Russell, I think, pretty good average in the small sample size, 47 average of 54 minutes. Now I'm noting that was only 2 games, so there's not too much to read into that. But Russell, I think it's a nice price for someone who is going to be on the end of a lot of tries from the likes of Gutherson and Moses. And so I also spoke earlier in preseason videos about the Dragons having a pretty good performance in the Charity Shield. And so Cody Ramsey looked quite good in that match. The left side of the Dragons looked pretty good. Shout out to SC Whisperer. Cody Ramsey is going to be his pin-up boy, I think, for the duration of his SC podcasting career. But Ramsey, could be an option. I think I don't mind actually spending that if you don't want to stretch all the way up to like Terrell Sloan and Zach Lomax, for example. Because the draw is pretty tough for the Dragons, you could just slot in Ramsey just to get a piece of that. Know that he's on the end of probably a lot of try assists potentially as well. So I don't really mind Ramsey, to be honest, if you just want to fill out your centre wing. Now the rest of the centre wing, so say Taylor May, only if he gets a starting right wing spot for the Panthers. Similar story with Robert Jennings, but it's kind of a three-way race between them two and then Charlie Staines. If Staines wins, then I'm not going to be considering the likes of Jennings or Taylor May. But whoever gets that right wing spot out of those two, I'd consider. If Staines gets it though, I'm not going to be considering Charlie Staines because he's just got poor base and I wouldn't go there again after last season. Oliver Gildart, again, 280k, but I think he only scored about 16 points in the preseason trial. Just not sure how consistent the Tigers are going to be in terms of scoring points, so I'm probably going to steer away from recommending Gildart. Now, Viliami Valet, hopefully I pronounced that right, it looks like he's actually in the hunt for a starting backline spot for the Warriors. Now, if that's the case, I think he's going to be very, very popular just because the Warriors have got a great draw to begin the season. And I think 205k, just take the gift again. Starting backline player playing in a good draw. And so I think Viliami is going to be a very popular cheapie and I would definitely recommend him as well. And so I've kind of circled the ones that I would mainly consider out of this list. Penasini, the Roosters right winger, Pereira, Russell and Viliami, and I think you could also throw in Cody Ramsey there. Those are the guys that I look at mainly. And so as I saw before with second row forward, there's not that many cheapies there, but there's a lot in centre wing. Therefore, I haven't listed Targo here, and I will try to get Targo up in your second row forward. And finally, ending on the fullbacks, there's only really one fullback I'd consider as a cheapie, which is Xavier Savage, but it looks like Nickel Klukstad is actually going to get the starting fullback spot. But in my opinion, you don't run with cheapies in fullback. You want to go for the two guns. And so just in the table, I wanted to throw in there the highest averaging players of the past few seasons. I've highlighted all the fullbacks. There's quite a few. And that's because the fullback is the spot you don't want to compromise on. You want to be spending big up there. So in my opinion, if you want to consider a cheapie in fullback, I would advise not to. In my opinion, go with your guns. Go with your Teddy, your Turbos, your Pappenhausens, your Guthersons, and save the money in the centre wing, but not in the fullback spot. Alright guys, that's my kind of overview of the best cheapies for the 2022 season, or at least the start of the season, and hopefully you guys got some value out of that. Really appreciate a thumbs up if you did, and obviously continue to subscribe to the channel if you do enjoy the content on the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video.